Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Thursday afternoon's tutorial, the last tutorial that you will have before the semester test. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of you are slightly concerned about what's going to be in tomorrow's test, and it is, I know it's stressful, but I don't think you need to stress too much. There's only two things we can ask. We can only ask random access or sequential. So, yeah, it can be one of the two. I don't know which one. But in any case, today's tutorial is more of a Q&A session. So you need to tell me what you want to see, obviously, the students that are here in the session. And we can go through that in Visual Studios. No, it's not, is it? Oh, I missed the end. Damn it. Okay, then I guess I have to make it random access for tomorrow. Damn. But Lunchman said I spelled it incorrectly, so obviously it's the... No, man, don't stress. It's tomorrow's test is about sequential. We did a practical on sequential, so we feel it's just a bit easier to have you guys do sequential on the paper tomorrow. Right. In case spelling doesn't count, we are in IT. Visual Studios will correct it for us. Right. So, what do you guys want to see? Let's start with that, and then we take it from there. So, you can go through one of the examples, tasks we've done. But what specifically do you want to see? Otherwise, is there anything you want me to go through? Calculations for files. Calculations. You need to be very specific now. You can't. You need to tell me exactly what you want to see. We have an hour. We have roughly an hour and 20 minutes, but the thing is that I don't want to waste too much time. So let's focus specifically on things you want to see. We'll use a code set that we've used before, and then we find the maximum number of records from a random access file. I assume you came in a bit later. I'll let the class give you a hint. So during this tab, I'm only going to discuss sequential files. If you want me to look at random access files, then go watch the Tuesday's tab. I'm not going to waste the other students' time right now because, like I said, I've already told you sequential is going to be in the paper tomorrow, and those that are here and those that are prepping for tomorrow wants to see the last things for tomorrow. Like I said, I think the person just came in slightly later. Right. Read and preserve does, okay. We have to do a complete design. Yes, you do have to do a complete design. Read and preserve just preserves the content of the array when you resize it. We did a extensive tut where we included that in inheritance. Is test data compulsory, like 100% compulsory? If you move to the front, you don't have to actually don't have to put test data into your system. We didn't include it in the paper itself. The paper is all about the code, not about the test data. Also instantiating objects in the input button. Okay, we can do that. Oh, in the design. Look at the mark sheet. I unfortunately can't open it right now because I'm not going to have a situation where I accidentally open up the question paper in front of you. But look at the mark sheet. We list out specifically what we want inside your design. Right. Now, guys, I need you guys to tell me what you want to see today. Q&A session. If you don't want, if you don't tell me what you want to see or what you want me to go through, then it's just going to be some silence, and then that's going to be it for today. Reading from file. Okay, we'll do that. Okay. Paper B, final question. Right. Sorry, you actually did mention that one before. Right, let's move this over. I'll share my screen in a second with you. Just go to paper B. Yes, sorry, I think audio is enabled. Just check. Yeah, audio is enabled.
Afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So I just wanted to ask about the design, specifically the algorithm part. Since the algorithm is sometimes longer, is there anything specific that we have to write for the algorithm, or do we write everything for the test?
Well, in the paper, you are told exactly what to do. So you'll be told what algorithm to use, what formula to use. You were told exactly what you need to do.
I'll answer
So-
Mr. Levesque. Okay, I don't know who's actually talking. But with the algorithm, it's quite simple. You have your events, correct? You have your actions for each event. Your algorithm is as long as the number of actions you have.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay. Remember, the algorithm is also only for the form, not the classes. So you must focus on the form with the algorithm. And remember, the design in total is only worth 5 marks. So don't spend too much time on the design unnecessarily. Okay, but it's worth 5 marks. The algorithm is basically per button. Just explain what each button is doing. Yeah, ignore what the markers told you. We'll be telling them other things, don't worry. When it comes to weekly practicals, when you have a full week, we can then expect more things from you. Tomorrow is a 3-hour paper, so it's going to be more focused on certain things. You have to include UML too. Yes, you have classes, so you have to draw the diagrams.
Sorry, I'm just trying to load up this solution file quickly. Oh, come on, why is this breaking?
In one button, have complex code for algorithm and design. Look, try not put everything into one button, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a bad habit I've seen with you guys is you tend to throw everything into one button. Try and break it up into smaller chunks. Remember, your algorithm doesn't need to be, yes, modular coding. Your algorithm doesn't need to be very detailed. It just needs to explain what the button's doing. You don't need to do declarations in your algorithm. You don't need to do conversions in your algorithm. You just need to explain what the button's doing, or how is it doing it.
Why is broken code uploaded? So stupid. Okay, let's just do one random one that will open. 2018 paper B, the solution was broken, so I'm not going to waste time by trying to fix it now. Which stuff did we do random access and sequential in? Superfluo has gone silent. I hate working from my laptop because everything's on my desktop at home.
Okay, I should do the algorithm in the design. Yes, you should do more than one button in the algorithm section. Each button is an event. Each event has a set of actions. Your algorithm needs to explain how the actions are accomplished.
Sorry, I'm just opening up a solution that works because someone uploads broken code.
As I fix it, so while you do something else.
Well, I don't want to be on an empty screen. I just want.
What are you trying to work with? The 2018 paper?
I actually don't care what I work with. I just want to show them sequential files. Okay, let's just do a blank definition and we'll use a record structure for that because you only want to look at files. Let's do that. Otherwise, we're wasting too much time now.
I think I know what's wrong. The shortcuts aren't working.
Not the shortcut.
And the files are empty.
Okay. So we'll go through the example of a sequential file. And then in the sequential file, we'll use a record structure to save the record structure into the file itself. Otherwise, what we can do is we can do a class and then just save the class of the file because that's more similar to what you are used to. All right, let's call this pre-test. Right, so while this is loading up, you can tell me what are the two variables needed in order to prep for sequential files. Okay, file stream and binary formatted, that is correct. What are the modifiers or the methods, sorry, the file modes that we can use, or that we'll most likely be using? So you don't want to see a C# application, you want to see a VB application. Create and open. Yes, and then the file access modes will be, the file access will be read and write. Right, so for this, let's just get a button onto our form. The button will create our file and write some information to the file itself, and then we'll do a read button where we can do some calculations with the information inside the file. Right, so that's creating the file. And then we have a button to read from the file. Now, one advice I can give you, some good advice I can give you, is don't spend too much time on your interface. I know a lot of you like making your interface look good. It's not going to make a difference for your test. Let's do a max function. So we'll start off with those important option statements. And then we can begin. So, first things first, our file streams. Now, keep in mind, you can do the imports. If you remember to do the imports, that is good. If you forget to do the imports, Visual Studios will most likely complain that they are not there. So the imports that you want to use, firstly, is system.io, so if you can get the file stream itself. And then the next import, you can remember what this import will be. Without looking at your slides, you can remember this. System.runtime. Oh, there we go. System.runtime, serialization, formatter, binary. Just be careful if it's blue, you're most likely using formatter and not format. So you can easily see that if you can't get to binary, that you might have made a mistake. And the first thing we can add in our form class itself is we can create our file stream and our binary formatter variables. And we can create our binary formatter variable over here. And let's do an array as well. So we create ourselves an array. Let's just call this array for now. And then we need a data type. So we're going to add a blank class. Any ideas for what class you want to use? We'll get to the constant file name now. It's a good thing to add that, because then you can never mistype the name itself. So let's do I can't remember the theme of the paper though. Vehicles. Okay, let's do a car. So we need to add our option statements here.
Sylvester, maybe zoom in the code a bit. It is a bit small. Oh, there we go.
Can you guys see it now?
Better they're happy.
Okay. Right. We'll create one instance variable here. So go private, let's just go private name, a string, and let's add a value so if we can do some calculations of this as well. So let's say, well, we've been using a student a lot, so let's go student. Let's just use student. We've been using student a lot. Never mind, it's now stuck on a student. We've got student underscore. We've got student ID. This will be as an integer. And then we've got a mark for the student as well. This is something that we can do some calculations with. 8 kilometers, include min-max algorithm when doing the reading from. Yeah, that's why I want a value there. So if we can do that when we read from it. Okay, let's make one for double. We can do that. And our property methods. I'm just going to do one for Mark, because Mark's the only one that we're actually going to use. No, that's a lie. We're going to use all of them. All right. So we set Mark. Return Mark. Let's just swap these around because maybe that's going to confuse you guys as well. You're used to it being first. Just grab this. So this is just setting up that class. This is something you guys are already used to. It's not something I believe I have to explain a lot of detail. So we're just setting up default values for our getters and our setters. And we're not going to do any validation here. Remember, if you have validation, the validation needs to be set or used inside the property method, and then you use the property method throughout your class. There is no validation inside the property method. If you're inside the class, you can either use the instance variable directly, or you can use the property method. Either way will be correct then. But if you have validation, validation is used inside your property method, and that means you need to use the property method inside the class as well. Otherwise, you need to call the validation on top of the instance variable that you'll be using. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. If you ever think about which one should I be using, can I use the instance variable or can I just simply use the property method? Think about whether you have validation or not. I assume someone wants to ask something. Someone was unmuted there for a second. Do you have a question? Right. So we've got a basic structure here. We've got our three instance variables, which is the student number, the name, and the mark, integer, string, and double. We've got our three property methods, which is our mark as a double, our ID as a integer in this case, and then our name as a string. ID? Yes. Good. Right. I'm not going to add any additional functions here. Right now, we're more concerned about what's going into the file and what's going to come out of the file. And then our max min function in this case is going to be under our main form class. That is how we're going to calculate it. So we're not using pre-existing variables, we're using temporary variables inside that formula itself. You're going to use the value as it comes out of the file, do your calculation, and then only use or save the one value that you are interested in. Okay, we have corrected that. All right. So that is our class. It's just a basic structure that we can use, that we can save this information to the class itself. Now, this is a student. We'll call this students, which is an array of students. And when we create our button, when we click on our button, what we'll do is we will read them our students. So now we're just going to do it by hand, but essentially this is a user input from your side because you'll be using a dynamic array, so it will change as you provide it with input, or you can set the variable at the beginning. It's going to be up to you. Just look at the paper, look what the paper is asking you. If we ask you to set up the array beforehand, or to modify the array as you go along, then you know how to do that dynamic allocation. So if you set the array up beforehand, you can just use readm. If you need to increase the array while using the array, you'll have to use readm preserve. All right, so we're readming students to 5, and we're going to add 5 students. That might give us an issue. Let's just rename this. That might give us an issue. Right, I just want to add a constructor here as well. It's going to make the code look a bit neater on the other side. We've got our public new, and we'll just set the ID as an integer, name as a string, mock as a double. ID equals ID, name equals name, now mark equals mark. Right, questions. When saving to a random file, if our identifier is 0, should we write the rest of the info to a blank record or just simply write a message box? What do you mean if the identifier is 0? I always say avoid shadowing, because it can cause issues. But if you deal with the shadow, then it's fine. Shadowing is just the concept that we showed you, but I'd still say avoid shadowing if you can. Let's go 50. Sorry, reading the questions and then doing this at the same time is not the best decision. Yeah. We'll have that as 60, we'll make that one 70, 80, 90. Let's put 1 in the middle. So let's put the highest one in the middle, that we can make sure that our max or our min function is working. So we'll make the highest one there, and we'll put the lowest one there. Yeah, okay. All right. So now that we have our array and our array is set up, we can now read the information, we can save it to a file. So when doing this, the purpose of this button is going to be save everything to a file. What is the first thing we need to do? We have the information that we need, and now we want to save to a file. We can say that we have let's use a counter. We'll have a counter here, we'll call it private num students, which will represent the number of students we have. Hold on. Okay, so that will represent the number of students that we have. Now, if we have the number of students, what is the next thing we need to do? Come on, guys. What's the next thing we need to do? The purpose of this is to save to a file. What do we need to do? Where do we start? I want to save to a file. What do I need to do? Create a new file. That's correct. So in this case, you're told that you're creating a new file. So you know that you're going to create a new file. You don't have to check if the file exists. And because we're creating a new file, even if the file does exist, it's going to be overwritten in any case. So you don't have to be too concerned about that. So how do we create that new file? What do I need? There's three things I need. First is the file name. Now, the file name will be given to you. The convention for the file name will be given to you. And in the test, your file name will be your student number .ifn. Now, the extension itself doesn't matter that much, as long as the file name convention is what it needs to be. Then, after the file name, what comes next? The access, right? So what's that? File access? What?
It's file mode.
File mode dot, and then create. Now, you'll very easily see, because we're using the provided enumerations, when you click on dot, you'll see which one you get. You know that the first one is supposed to be whether you're opening or creating the file, and the second one indicates what you're going to do with the file. Are you going to read to a file? Are you going to write to a file? What are you going to do? So in this case, we know we're going to create, and our file access is going to be write. So that's our file stream. It's set. That line will create the file. If the file does exist, it will simulate deleting the file and creating a new one, as we've shown in one of the tests. So that line specifically will write to a file. Now, why not read and write in this case is because we're not interested in what's in the file. We want to create the file. The purpose of this function is to create the file. We're not going to do anything right now that's going to read from that file. Now, it's important to note that if I have to write to a file, I'm locking that file, which means no one else can see or open that file at that point. They can see the file, but they can't open it. They can't use it. If it's read, it does lock the file, but if someone tries to write to the file, your information is not going to be up to date. So just be careful about that one. But we opened the file for a specific reason. So instead of opening it up for everything, open it up for that reason. Otherwise, you're just wasting the resource. If you open up for read and write, and you're only going to write to the file, you're wasting that read resource. Right. Next thing is a binary formatter, new binary formatter, and that is just the empty parameter. So we're happy with that. Now, you've been told you're going to write, and it's a sequential file, so we're going to write every object to this file. How am I going to do that? How am I going to start with that? For loop, that is correct. So we had our for loop. I like using index as my term, but you can use any term there. Just keep in mind, you can use any term there. It doesn't matter as long as you know where you start and where you begin. I mean, where you start and where you end. I'm confusing myself here. 5, yeah. Right. Here I'm using the variable that we've created because you will have a variable in your test of saying this is how many students I have. I'm not going to type it out by hand. Right. So once we have our for loop, inside our for loop is where we're going to start saving to the file. How am I going to do that? So binary formatted doesn't require a parameter because in the actual command that we're going to save to the file, we tell it what we're going to save to the file. Serialize. Right. Now, before we get there, because a lot of you are now realizing what's going to happen. So binary formatter dot serialize, and we need to give it the file stream. So the file stream that has been opened, and we need to give it the object that we're going to save. You all agree with that? So you've got the file stream and you've got the object. So in this case, our object is going to be, where is it at? Student dot index. We close that. Right. Now, my first question, let's see who's been focusing. All right, good for pointing that out. We did not close our file stream yet. So let's just add that. Let's close our file stream. Let's close our binary formatter. I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to run this code. I'm going to ask you, what is going to happen if I run this now? Do you think it's going to work? Ah, I'm glad to see you guys are concentrating. You can set it to nothing. That is a garbage collection method. For me, it's not really that important. So those, if you add that, it's good. You're not going to get any marks of that. You're not going to lose any marks of that because that's just garbage collection things. It's just ensuring that the actual binary format and the file stream is deallocated, and then you make sure that it's closed. But these two lines are not going to give you additional marks. It's also not going to lose you any marks if you don't have that. So it's not something to stress about. Now, as a lot of you would have noted, this will not work. It's not giving me any errors here. It's not telling me there's an issue. But when I run this, it will crash on this line. And a lot of you actually saw why, and it's because we never added the tag to say that this class is serializable. Now, when you're doing a serializable or a sequential file, you need to make sure to add that tag. If you don't add that tag, you are not giving that file permission or that class permission to be converted. Now you can add the brackets, you don't have to add the brackets, it's going to be the same thing. So that tells it this class, you're allowing this class to be serializable. You're allowing the class to be converted into a format the machine can understand. Let's convert it. Will this work now? That is a good, excellent question as well. Now, if you're using a derived class, both the classes, whatever information is being saved to the file, that information must be part of a serializable class. So if you're saving a object that could be a derived class to a file, the parent and the child or the derived class has to be serializable. It can't just be one, it has to be both of them. Now, the good thing is the program will crash and it will tell you this class is not serializable. So if you forgot to add that tag to one of the two comments, or one of the two classes, it will tell you that this is why it's breaking. It's going to tell you the derived class is not serializable or cannot be converted. And it will suggest that you add that tag. Now, let's say you submit your code, and that is the only mistake you have, is you forgot to add that tag. If your parent has it and your child or your derived class does not have it, it can be a small mistake. So in that case, you'll lose 1 mark. Yes, even though the application will not run properly, we can see what causes the mistake, and we can see that it's only that one term. Obviously, we're not going to remove half of your marks for one silly mistake. So in a case like that, you'll lose 1 mark because the fix is just adding 1 term. It's not that big of a mistake. If there's an issue with an algorithm, then you'll lose more marks. But if it's something small like just a word, just a term, or just a comma or a bracket out of place, most of the times you won't even lose a mark for that because we can understand that you can make mistakes like that. It's not a lot of time to run things. Now, second advice for your test. You're not done with this yet, but this code can run. It can be executed. So I suggest, as you code your application, run it incrementally. As you do a function, as you do a section of code, run that section of code to see if it's working or not. If you get to the end and you run the entire thing and it breaks, it can be the entire program. But if you run the program as you go along and it works up until a point where it stops working, you know exactly where your mistake comes from. So we create the file, and in this case, we don't see anything crashing, we don't see anything going wrong. So we can close this, and to confirm whether it was successfully created, we can simply just go to the directory, go to where the executable file is, and then you'll see that the file has been created. So open up the file, and you'll see you'll have information inside. So it has successfully written everything to your machine. So now you know it works. So the create file and writing to a file work. So now you know you're done with this section. You don't have to stress about the section anymore. Then you can go on to the next section. I'm not a fan of doing a message box like that. Let's put it this way: you won't lose a mark if you add a message box saying, let's say you say, go message box file has been created. I don't see a big issue with that. But here's my thing: it's not going to give you any marks. You're not going to lose any marks. So if you want to add that for you, then it's fine. And now keep in mind that when you're designing an application, you're not going to add debug information. Created and saved, and you don't have to give a message. The system will crash if it doesn't create. Now, like I said, if you want to add a message box to say that it's been created, you're more than welcome to do that. If it's going to help you perform better in the test, add it for yourself. I'm just warning you, don't waste too much time on things that will not give you marks. Look at the mark sheet, look at what is asked from you or expected of you, and then follow those guidelines. We tell you very nicely exactly what we want from you, and the mark sheet also tells you where the marks are coming from. You can very clearly see what we want and how we want it as well. Now, our next button, let's add a text box here. Text box. This text box is going to be for our highest or our lowest. We'll still decide. So let's say max-min. Now, for our read function, the description that you'll receive, the question will be phrased as follows, or along the following lines. Without using any of the pre-existing variables, determine the maximum or the minimum. There will be a bit more of what exactly you're determining, but that's going to be the crux of it. Determine the maximum or minimum from a file without using any of the pre-existing variables. Everything needs to be local to that button. Now, that being said, how do we start with this? Where do we start with this? Create the local max file, new file stream. Right. Now, here is where a lot of you might slightly differ. So let's talk about this in terms of a design. Let's consider this in terms of a design. What variables will I need to determine the max value from this file? Let's go with a max value. So let's go button. We'll say determine max. And let's look at the variables. What variables will I need to determine the max here? So we're going to need the marks from the file. So what are we going to display? So let's display the student number. We're going to display the student number with the highest mark. Right. Now, that being considered, or that being said, what variables do I need? Yes, you are not using any of the variables created before. It's now variables that has to be local. Everything you need will have to come from inside this button. Right, so we need an integer for max. So let's go dim max as integer. I think max is reserved, but I'm just going to say maxi. Oh no, we can go max. So max, what else do we need? Do we need an index? Right. There's two ways in which we can approach this. I'm going to show you both ways, okay? So we've got dim max, dim max student, and then we have our file stream. So dim max and dim max student. Max will be the maximum, the highest mark. Max student will be the student with the highest mark. What we want is we want the student with the highest mark. So we just want the student number. So currently we have nothing. We don't know where the student with the highest mark is. All we know is we've got a file, and somewhere in this file that information will be present. You are right, it should be a double because mark was a double. So file stream equals new file stream. How are we going to open this file? Now you can use a constant variable if you want to, or you can use the text itself. It doesn't matter. If we tell you to create a constant variable, then you must create a constant variable. Otherwise, it won't matter. Okay, and we've got file mode. dot open. We've got file access dot read. I just wonder what do you become of something new? Spelling. What spelling? Did I make it? Oh, I'm assuming it's what I've just corrected. Right. Then we have our binary formatter, which is just going to be a new binary formatter and into brackets. Now, how do we start? Now, I'm going to show you both approaches. We can do one approach with a variable and a dim array, or a dim temporary student placement. And then we'll do one variable or one example where we use an array. Okay, so as you correctly indicated, first thing we need to do is we need to use a while loop. The while loop is to check whether we have something in the file stream. This is important, so consider this. Can I test something before reading something? No, I cannot. Can I read something if there's nothing there? No, I cannot. I need to make sure that if I'm reading from this file stream, that there is, in fact, something inside this file stream. So I've got position, and if position is less than length, which means that if my current position in the file is smaller than the length of the information inside that specific file or that specific line, it means there's nothing there. So the file will end, and we can continue with whatever code we want to do after that. So while the file position is smaller than the length, it means that there's information still inside and we can read. If the file position is larger than the length, it means that there's nothing left inside the file. Now, what do we do? Do we need a counter? Really consider this. Now, this approach is not going to make use of an array. This approach is just using those two temporary variables, max value and max student. So, inside, I'll have a temp student. Temp student. Right? Then I'm going to deserialize the file stream. And that is going to be the file stream and then the type I'm casting it into. Okay, so let's see. Is this going to work? Is it not going to work? Can I do that? How does deserialize work? You guys tell me, how does deserialize work? What do I do with deserialize? I'm assuming you guys can still hear me. My screen just went blank. Okay, there we go. Deserialize to type object. It converts the binary data into a file to a VB object. That is correct. Now, deserialize reads a single object. That reads an object from the file. So you don't need to pull anything else except the file stream in deserialize. That is now an object that's returning from the file. I need to put this object into my temporary value. So in this case, we do direct cast. The object that I'm retrieving, if we can spell direct, and then give it the type. In this case, student. Now, is this okay? Do I need to test whether the object I'm retrieving is a student? Why and or why not? Why don't I have to test whether it's a student? Give me those magic words. That is correct. If I used upcasting to save to the file, then I need to test the object when I retrieve the file. If I know I'm only storing a specific class type, no derived classes, no upcasting, no downcasting, I'm only storing a specific class type to this file, and I don't need to test the object when it comes out. If I'm storing more than one class type in this file, then I need to check what the type is. So if I had a class, let's call it parent, and a derived class child, and then I store everything inside the array of parent. So I can have a child object that can also be a parent. And I store all of that in one array, and I save that to a file. Then I can have object parent and object child inside this file. Then I need to test when I'm direct casting it back into a type, what type it is. But if I know, in this case, I'm only storing a student, there's no derived classes, there's no parent classes, it's only student I'm storing, I don't need to test whether it is a student when I take it out of the file, because I know it's only that class. Composition is slightly different. So composition is inside the class definition. So when you store it inside the class definition, the other composition is already there. Inheritance, it can be in multiple forms. Composition is the form, it's just the class inside the class that is declared. The composition doesn't work the same as inheritance when storing. If you have composition, you can still just store it to a file because you're not going to test whether it's the composition type that you're removing. In this case, no, because in this case, we're only going to test one instance. I said I'm going to show you two ways of doing this. There's some students that will do it with a single variable, other students will do it with an array. So I'm going to show you both ways. In this case, I've got my single student that I'm pulling. That's why I'm putting it inside a temp. And now what I can do is I can test whether the student is the current max or not. So current max, we set to 0. Why we do that is because you can't have anything less than 0 in the paper. Not in this case. We don't have negative marking, so there's no issues here. So if temp, this is now the object we just pulled from the file, but mark is less than max. If the mark of the student we just pulled from the file is less than our current max, and our current max is 0, then we know, is more than our current max. Then we know the student we just pulled is the new maximum, which means that the new max is equal to temp.mark, and that the max student is equal to temp.id. the mark is less than the current max, then the next file is going to be, or the next item in the file is going to be read. So what this does, it pulls an object from the file, tests it against the current maximum. If it is larger than the current maximum, make that the new max, store the student number, and when this file is done, you just simply maxmin.text, string output, and then we output the max number for the max student. There you have your value. So let's check if this works. Run it. We know we still have our file, so the information is still there. I have my test data, so this is where test data is important, because I can confirm what the correct result is, what should be displayed. So if I look at my display over here, the values that I'm putting into this array, I can see that student 2020-0003 shall should be the maximum value. So I should see the student number 2020-0003. So we open this, run that, and what do I see? I've got the correct student number there. Now, as you pointed out, Taha, how do you pronounce that TH? Is it Taha? Okay, perfect. So as Taha pointed out, I did not close the file. You guys see that there's no closed file here. Let's stop this program. You see my program did not crash, right? There's no issues here. It did not crash. I'm stopping this program. I'm running it again. Reading from the file. Do you see my application does not crash? Now that's the garbage collector that does that for me. So I close the program before running it again. It does not crash. So you're looking at it, testing it, see it works. You get your mark back and see, oh, but I lost a mark. Why did I lose a mark? Here's the thing. A lot of you won't test it again. If I click on this button again, it's going to try and read from the file again. Only then it has crashed now. No, it has not. Oh. Tell me they did automatic garbage collection as well now. Interesting. DB is smart, but here's the bad thing. If you don't close your file, we're still going to deduct marks. So you need to close your file. Oh, I know why it's not crashing. You know why it's not crashing? Because it's in read mode. If this was in write mode, it would crash. So let me show you. Let's remove that line. That's the read, that's the create file. We open up in write mode. Run it. Click on write. File has been created. I click on read. Now it's going to crash. And this is the error message that you'll see. You'll see it's an IO exception, and it will say because it's used by another application. That is that locking you see. Because it is in write mode, it locks the file. Because we're reading and it's in read mode, it doesn't lock the file, so I can still open up a new file stream. All right, nothing interesting for you, but like I said, if you don't close your file, you are going to lose marks. So even if it doesn't crash, make sure you close your file, because when you're reading, you won't see it crashing, as I just showed you. If you're writing and you don't, you'll very quickly see if it's going to break or not, because it will stop your application. Now, that's the one way of doing this. You'll lose one If you don't close it, you'll lose 1 mark. Even let's say I forgot to close it up here when I created the file, you'll lose 1 mark over there, but it won't affect the marks over here. So even though I can't test your program based on the code you submitted, I will then go and add that line and then test it again. So you won't lose marks for it crashing beyond that point. It will still be tested. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another button here. And this is going to be the other format of my read and my maximum. So in this case, what I'm going to do is just remove all of this. In this case, I'm going to have a temporary array. So we have our temp students, array as student. Then you're gonna read them this. Now, this is where it gets interesting. You don't know how many students you have in this. There's no way what you're redoing to. So we're going to use a counter as an integer. And that's all we're going to use for now. Open up our file stream, open up our binary formatter, check whether there's something in this file stream. If there is something in this file stream, we increase our counter by 1, because this means we are going to read something, we're going to retrieve an object from the file. Now, we read them, preserve the array. The read and preserve will now allow us to keep what's inside the array safe. Read and preserve, and then temp students and then counter. So it's going to be, for the first time, it's going to be 1, 2, 3 until you stop reading. It will keep on increasing that array until you don't have anything in this file anymore. So you know how many students you have then at the end of the day. Then same situation will happen here. We have temp students with counter. So that is now position 1. So the position is the amount you have. So that is students position 1 equals binary formatter. So here you're still going to do your direct cast. Binary formatter, deserialize the file stream. That hasn't changed. You're going to cast it into a student. That hasn't changed. And that is reading from the file. So what you're doing here is you're increasing the array by 1 and putting the object into the array. That's all you're doing there. Then, once you're done with the class, with the file, you close the file. After that, now we're going to test our max. So in this case, you've got max, you can do max value as integer. And then we can do a max index as integer. Then we would do a for loop. So for index as integer equals 0 to counter. We will assume, remember, when we use an array for our counter, for our max value, we assume that the highest value for max is the current highest, is the first item in the array. If it's students 1 dot mark. Right? That needs to be a double, sorry. And then the current highest index is 1 because it's the first item in that array. Now, thank you for pointing that out. Let's just remove those two lines. So the first item in the array is set to the current max. After that, we keep on testing. So for index as integer equals 1 to counter. So you can start from the first item, or you can start from the item thereafter. It's not going to make that big of a difference. Then you test. If the current max value is smaller than the temp value, then that will be the new maximum, right? Sorry, max dot. So the current maximum value, if the current maximum value is smaller than the temporary maximum that we'll get from that index, then that will be the new highest mark, which means max value will be equal to the new value, and then the max index will be your current index, so that you know where you can pull it from. So when you're done with this if statement, when you're done with this for loop, you've gone through every single one of them, you know which value is the highest value, and you can go to your file. So you go to your file max_min text equals your toString, your toString, your string converter, the temp students, the max index dot ID. You get the ID of the student of the current maximum value. Now, we've already tested this out. You know it's the third student with the student number 2020-0003. So we run that and we see we get the correct output. So whether we do it with a, let's just close, whether we do this while we're reading inside our while loop, or whether we do a temporary array and then do the calculations afterwards, both of them are acceptable methods. I'm just showing them both to you because some students will do it the one way and the other students will do it the other way. So I'm showing both so that you can see both scenarios, the one that you would have used. All right. So that's reading and writing to a file using a serializable class and reading and doing some form of calculation. Now, like I said, you can do it while the class is open, while you're reading, which means you have an individual temporary variable, or you can read it into a temporary array, but then you have to keep track of the array values, how many values you, or how many attributes, sorry, how many objects you have in your array, and you need to ensure that you use read and preserve. If you only use read and not read and preserve, then you're going to only have one value in that array because it's going to set all the other values to 0. A very important thing to keep in mind. So what could happen if you were to close the file stream after the max calculation? How do you mean? I mean over here. If I did that and I put it down here, that would still be acceptable. So keep in mind, this entire event, this button that was just coded, the idea of this button is to open up the file, check which one is the maximum, print my maximum, and that's that. Whether you close it at the end of that entire process, or whether you close it directly after you're done with the file, as long as you close it in this specific process before you do something else. If you close it only after you do something else in terms of going to another button or going to another subroutine or a function, then there would be an issue. But if you close it within the context of that specific algorithm, then it is still acceptable. because you're not going to do anything else with a file before you close this file. Right, so the green line over here so the issue over here is the fact that we're using a specific value here. When we're creating this entire system, the value here is only determined inside this while loop. So there can be a potential situation where there's nothing inside this while loop, which means this will essentially crash. For example, I go comment all of these out. I create this file has been created to show you there's nothing inside this file. I run this line, it gives me 0 because nothing was read through, so that max value is nothing. I read this line, it's going to crash on that line because I'm using the value 1 inside this array, but this array was never actually set. That array is only resized inside the while loop, but because there's nothing inside my file, that line was never run. So because we're trying to use this first value, it is giving me a 0. Now, in the test, we won't actually mark you down for this because this is actually a developer issue. We are supposed to be checking before this whether there is something inside this array if we're doing something like this. So you would check whether the length of temp students is 0 or not before doing this. Now, if you do this in your semester test or something similar to this and you don't check that value, we won't actually mark you down on that. Right. But that's why you have the green line there, is because there is a situation where the code can crash. It's basically just warning you that you're using a value before it's ever been assigned a value. Right. Well, keep in mind you are checking f length over here. But the concern is not f length. The concern itself is the student. Now keep in mind, over here, because I'm reading it into a temporary array, I need to check whether there's something inside the array. F length only checks whether there is information inside this file. Depending on how you use this, let's say you start from the very last item, this could potentially still crash as well. So in this case, because we're not dealing with the file there anymore, you would check student. You won't check the file. Your concern is now the student array, not the objects inside the file anymore. If your concern is inside the file, yes, then you could use file length. But that's not the concern. The concern is the array itself. As I see, we would use it, not. Where would you put temp student equals nothing? If you do that, this will still crash. Remember, the idea of the max function over here using an array is you set the maximum to the first item in that array, because then you're guaranteed that there is a value comparison within the range what is being stored inside your array. If you just set it to 0, so at the top where we set the mark to 0, I am now assuming that negative marks are not present. But what happens if there are negative marks in this array? What if the maximum is a -1? Now I set it to 0, which means every single item in this file is never going to be even read because it's already less than, it's already smaller than the current maximum, which is 0. That's why it's safer to make the first item in the array the comparison metric, the first comparison metric. But because we're using marks, the assumption is you can't get less than 0. So 0 is the one being used to be on the safe side. But if you use something like currencies and text or any numerical value, you can get a negative. If you set it to 0 and you get a negative, and the negative is your highest number, is an issue. Let's say you do temperatures. What is the highest temperature in Antarctica in a week? And if the highest temperature was -10, there's no way we're going to get a value because we say max is 0, which means every negative mark is already less than the current max, so we'll never actually see what that maximum was. Right. Because of how we're reading it here from this file, that is the solution we're using. But like I said, because it is a student and it's a mark, we assume you can't get less than a negative, less than 0. If you're really concerned about whether it's going to be read or not, and you want something, let's say the maximum is a 0, you can always use the equal to sign, which means if there is a duplicate value, the new duplicate value will be the current maximum, and not the first duplicate value you experience. But that is min-max stuff. That is algorithmic considerations. That, like I said, it's not, in this case, if you do it this way, it will be fine. If you do it this way, it will be fine. You don't have to worry about it that much. Also look at the validation rules, because the validation rules will tell you what that min and max will be. Because in the test, you are going to validate somewhere. You are going to have that utility function. You know that that value is not going to be less than a certain value. I don't want to give it away completely, but there is going to be validation. Right. Now, we are getting close to, in fact, I think I'm already running slightly. No, we still have 8 minutes left. So is there anything else you guys would like to see? Did this help you? I'm assuming a lot of you that are currently here are fairly comfortable with the creating a file stream, reading from a file stream, and the while loop itself. It's just the internals of the actual doing something with the code that you might have been slightly confused about. As you can see, there's multiple ways in which you can do this. You can read it into a temporary array. You can read it into an individual variable and then test it right there. It just depends on how you choose to do it. I want you guys to get used to the fact that there's multiple solutions for a problem. There's not just one solution. Just because we might be showing you one solution doesn't always mean that's the only solution that is possible. Well, in this case, you can't get rid of it until you tested it. So if I test beforehand whether this whether this array has something in it or not, then you can't get rid of it. So, for instance, if I go if temp student dot length is less than or equal to 0, let's say it's larger than 0, which means there is something inside, then do the following, which will be this. So you get rid of that one, but this one will still be an issue because it's never been set. Unless you go and you say nothing. Here it's being reset, and there it has been considered that it is nothing. But then this will kind of still give an issue. I don't want to go into too much detail about just how to remove that green line, because it's not going to give you more or less marks. It's just the fact that it's never been declared. You're declaring it inside a conditional statement. So if that never runs, it's never been declared or associated with anything. And that's why it's being complained, because there is no association for it. Now that I've set it to nothing, it has been in its view been instantiated. But if you run this, you'll most likely see it's still going to crash, because now student is nothing. There's literally nothing there. So don't worry about the green lines. The green lines are just warnings. When you code it out, you probably won't code it in the way that it will have a green line. And if you do, it's fine. If it works, don't worry about it. You just need to answer the questions. We're not going to do excessive testing. Did you consider this? Did you consider that? Did you consider that? We're not going to look at all of those things. We're going to look at, did you answer the questions that we wanted you to answer? Did you do it as requested? Validation stuff only comes in your second and third year, where you kind of need to validate everything. You know, testing whether the user is complying to the conformance or to the requirements of the machine or to the program, and not doing stupid things with the application. Right now, we assume the user knows what he or she is doing and that he's not going to make a mistake. Second year and third year, then we assume the user is going to make a mistake, and you need to test them, you need to validate them. So unless we explicitly say you need to validate a value, you don't have to validate a value. But if it's been suggested that you need to validate something, then you must validate something. That's why I say read the question paper carefully. We tell you exactly what needs to be validated. If we're told to display things on separate lines, we use environment.newLine after each display details in our method. Yes. So if you're asked to display something in a multi-line text box, then you already know you're going to have to use the environmental.newLine. I would suggest just test out the layout when you print it out, when you test your application, just check that it displays nicely. Sometimes you might want to add an additional environment.newLine or a newline character, just so there might be a space between. Other times you want them on top of one another. So test the layout as long as you conform to what is requested. Yes, Mabaso?
So I wanted to ask, if we have two classes and they both have a display function, but one is, like, we're told that it should be displayed in a single line, in the other one it has to be displayed within a multi-line. And what can I say? Like the class which has the single line display is actually required in the one with the multi-line. So how do we actually go about doing that? Do we write down all of the information again, or we just use my base and leave it as a straight, like, one line?
Right, so where you call the function, you'll most likely just add a new line to when you call the function. So let's say you've got the form and you use the code base that puts everything into one line. After you call the one function, you'll probably just add a new line after the function.
So even though it's a single line, yet it's required to be multi-line.
Yes, but we will never tell you to do one class straight line or single line and another class multi-line. And if you're using a multi-line text box or a rich text box, you're always going to have that append. So every time you append, you add. Every time you add, you just put it on a new line. So when you append, you'll add the new line comment behind whatever function call you're making. No, there won't be any exception handling. So because of the design, we're not going to test. So what's going to happen is we're going to release the paper at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. We'll probably release it about 5 minutes to, well, 2 to 5 minutes earlier. So just to compensate for everybody trying to download the paper at the same time, you'll have about 5 to 10 minutes reading time. And reading time refers to the fact that you're compensating for people with a slow connection that's trying to download the paper. So the official time that's going to start the paper is going to be 14:10, 10 minutes past 2. You have 3 hours to write this paper, or to type this paper, to do the application itself. 3 hours. Once those 3 hours are done, you will save your work and you will submit. You have an hour in which you need to submit your papers. Now, you're not going to check exactly when you ended and exactly when you started, but once that hour, that submission hour is done, the submissions will lock. If you submit late, you'll have to give a very, very valid reason for why it is late. And if I'm saying it's late, I'm referring to like 5 minutes late, because anything after a 5 minute, let's say a 1 minute to 2 minute grace period, it will not be accepted. Because that last submission hour is meant for submission. It's not meant for you to continue coding. It's meant for you to submit. Now, obviously, we're not going to check whether you actually coded or attempted to submit during that hour. We're just simply going to take what's on Eve and we're going to mark that. And if the file was only saved during the upload time, what happens then? Well, then it was saved during the upload time. Like I said, we're not going to check the date timestamp for when it was saved. But if Eve closes the submission link, it is closed. It's not going to be opened again. So if you're going to use the submission time to still write, that is up to you, but we're not going to extend the submission time. You have 1 hour in which you need to submit. And if you miss that time frame, you have like 2 or 3 minutes grace period, and you'll have to explain why it was late. After that, nothing will be accepted. Is that our submission time? To compensate for slow connections, maybe an upload issue where you have to email us or Discord us, tell us, so there's an issue here, my father's too large, or I'm struggling to upload, or I'll tell you, okay, email it to me, I'll upload it for you so you can still check it. That hour submission time is for submission. It's to compensate for submission issues. It's not meant for you to type during that. But, like I said, you're not going to check when you saved and uploaded. You're just going to take what's on Eve, and we're going to mark that. That is why you have the hour submission time. Is to compensate for that congestion. Now, there are only 309 students. Eve won't fall over that easily. The lectures will end next week, Thursday. So next week. Next week is the last week of lecturing. No, next week is the last week of the semester, right? Right. So I'm going to stop the recording here. We are going slightly over time now. But if there's any more questions, I'll still be around for about 5 more minutes if you have any more questions. But don't stress too much about tomorrow. You have more than enough time to write. You have 3 hours to write, 1 hour to upload. So you have more than enough time to finish this paper. Read the questions carefully. Make sure you know what is being requested of you. Don't overthink it. That's all I'm going to say is don't overthink it. Answer what is requested. Only do what is requested. Don't go above and beyond and waste your own time. Right. In any case, good luck for tomorrow. I hope you guys enjoy it. And yeah. Yes, the guidelines are on Discord, and it is. I'll just double check, but it should be on Eve as well. Sorry, it should be on Eve as well. But the guidelines are the same as all the other papers. Just to double check Discord, and it is on Eve as well. Okay, so yeah, it is on Eve. Everything we submit to Discord will be officially submitted to Eve first. So if you have any queries, you can still ask it on Discord. I'll be online for a while tonight, but only for like emergency queries, not to recover work though. Yes, the honesty declaration will be, we'll upload that slightly earlier. So the honesty declaration, I normally upload a bit an hour, 2 hours before the paper, so you can get that out of the way. I might upload it early tomorrow morning, but the honesty declaration is also left open for a while. Please note, if you submit your project to the honesty declaration after the fact of after the closing or after the submission deadline, it will not be evaluated. Honesty declaration is normally kept open a bit longer so that you can complete that after you completed your test. If you submit your paper in that slot, it will not be evaluated. Please don't make that mistake. Obviously, if you submit it in time, we'll still look at it, but if you submit it outside the submission time, which means you did it intentionally, it will not be looked at. And you will most likely be contacted either by myself or by Mr. Cottrell. I mean, Dr. Cottrell. But like I said, don't stress about these things because you guys are going to work yourself up. Before the test, take a deep breath, make sure you are relaxed, read carefully through the paper, spend about 10 minutes on the design, and then start your application. So guys, you guys and you girls will see it's not a difficult paper as long as you attended tutorials, as long as you attended lectures, as long as you did your own practicals. This should be an easy test. If you did not do any of those that was mentioned, then I wish you the best of luck because I can't see how you will then pass tomorrow. Right. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and yeah, just relax.